first candidate tonight, Michael Payne. He's an educator, an engineer, has a little political, he studied political science a little bit at U of L. But I've found him to be a tenacious walker. I know you're pretty close to 11,000 doors.
Right at give or take 100.
That's a lot of doors, folks. And he's been out here. He's give up his wife Ann's here, and or Amy. I'm sorry, not Ann. Sorry about that, Mike.
That's all right.
And his son. But it takes a lot, and I want to introduce a fine fellow here. He'll make us a great representative in House District 28, Michael Payne.
First and foremost, let me begin by saying thanks to everybody who comes out. It's always difficult to bring people out of their homes, away from their TVs, away from their laptops in order to come out and become politically engaged. So my hat's off to everybody here who is willing to go the extra effort to learn a little bit about candidates, who is here to learn a little bit about the issues, and most importantly, let their voice be heard, because I envision this as more of a give and take than me just standing up here, rattling off a few policy positions and sitting down and eating a burrito. So I want to bring you guys into the conversation, but before we do that, it's always good to let people know where I stand and who I am. As Bob mentioned, my name is Michael Payne. I've lived out here every day of my life, 44 years. I was born in 1972, grew up in Valley Downs, graduated from Valley High School in 1990. Went on to get a couple degrees from Sullivan College of Technology and Design. Currently, I am an engineer with Carreta Integrated Systems, as well as an instructor of mechanical design at my alma mater, Sullivan College of Technology and Design. I've been out there for 8 years. The reason I'm here and the reason I'm running is because of my roots. It's because of my admiration for the people of Southwest Jefferson County. It's because of my long-standing love for the community, and just as importantly, for where I've seen it go. Unfortunately, if you've lived out here for any length of time, you've seen the state of the community out here. There's economic depression, if you will. We're lacking economic opportunities. Our education system we have some of the most poorest performing schools in not only the district, but in some cases the state out here in Southwest Jefferson County. And the crime, the heroin, the drug addiction, it all forms a very caustic mix that has the potential to not only undermine our daily lives, but also undermine the structure of our families. And to me, that is very important that we actually stand up and begin to move Southwest Jefferson County and the Commonwealth in general in a new direction. So how do we do that? Well, one of the first things we have to address is the economic situation in our state. Across the board, there is minimal job creation at best, and when there is new job creation, it is low-wage, low-skilled jobs. So how do we address that? Well, the first thing we have to do is we have to attract new businesses to the Commonwealth. That is done through a few different means. I guess primarily the best way to go about it is to reform our entire tax code by looking at things like a flat tax, by looking at how we can save individuals money on their tax bill so that they have it in their pockets as opposed to in the pockets of the bureaucrats to spend on frivolous projects to keep them elected and get them reelected. We also have to do that on the business level, on the corporate level. We have to look at ways to develop a tax system that doesn't penalize success. We have to look at a tax system that encourages investment in our state and encourages people to put their rear on the line, to go out and create businesses, to go out and be entrepreneurs. And there's an educational element in that we're going to have to talk about in a second. But in order to create economic opportunities across the board, we have to come together as a state. We have to begin to look at new ways to do things, things that are somewhat out of the box. A lot of people don't like the idea of a flat tax. But in order for us to compete against Tennessee, to compete against West Virginia, to compete against Indiana, Ohio, and other surrounding states that continue to outpace us in job creation and attracting new businesses and reinvesting in the businesses that are already there, we have to sometimes go outside of the box and do some different things. So from a financial standpoint, those are some of the ways we can increase job creation. We also have to look at workforce training. Another reason that we have such a huge problem bringing businesses to the state is that we have a workforce that is lacking some of the necessary skills in order to compete in some of today's highly technical jobs. Now, I have no problem with people going and getting a 4-year degree. I encourage you to go get a 4-year degree. But I also encourage people to go get technical degrees, to learn how to be computer technicians, to learn how to be electricians, to engage in those hands-on skills that we need in order to create a business environment in this state that attracts companies, keeps companies, and again, allows companies or encourages companies to reinvest in the state to create more jobs. So those are the two things we can do right off the bat in order to create jobs in the state. There's another component to all that, and it's the education. In order to take Kentucky in a new direction, we have to face some tough decisions in our education policy. It's not as simply throw more money at the problem. We've been doing that for decades, and you can see the state of our education system today. We have teachers who aren't allowed to teach because their hands are tied by the bureaucrats in Frankfurt and Washington and the teachers' unions. We have teachers who can't maintain order in their classroom because the local school boards are more concerned with social engineering than they are actually educating our children. So what do we have to do? Well, one of the first things we have to do is we have to let teachers teach. Right now, the Kentucky Department of Education continues to force a curriculum onto individual teachers in their classroom. I talked to a lot of teachers knocking on the number of doors Bob has talked about. And one of the first things they complain about is they want Frankfurt and the Jefferson County Board of Education to get out of their classroom. They are the people on the front lines. They have a better understanding than anybody in Frankfurt or down on New Cut Road where the Board of Education is, the Van Hoos building. They have a better understanding of how to reach these individual children, how to reach the children that may have a troubled background or have a difficulty learning certain subjects. They are the trained professionals. We have to get out of the way and give them the tools and the freedom and the flexibility to address the issues in each individual classroom the best way they see fit. So that's one thing we got to do. As far as higher education goes, what we have to do is the first thing we have to do, we have to freeze college tuition rates. Okay? Right now, the higher education system, the state-run university system in the state of Kentucky, is a bloated bureaucracy. It is not run like a business. It's run more like a charity. They continue to hemorrhage money because their idea of higher education is higher buildings. They're engaged in this massive building program because they think that actually draws in students. And I would be hesitant to admit to that. Instead of building more buildings, they need to continue to build smarter kids. And they can do that by allowing more kids the opportunity to attend school. Right now, if a kid goes to U of L or U of K, any state-run university, and they're forced to get a student loan, they come out of those universities with $40,000 to $50,000, even $60,000 of student loan debt. With that much debt, they are unable, over the course of their life, to accumulate wealth. They can make money, they may have money in their pocket, but they can't invest in their future and their children's future because for the next 20 years, they're going to be saddled with a monthly payment that they're going to have to pay back. So we have to begin to address that so that they can begin to invest in homes, cars, and their children's future and their children's education. Another thing that we have to do is we have to allow some non-traditional educators into our public schools. When I say non-traditional educators, what do I mean? I think that we need to let people with degrees in the hard sciences and mathematics into our school without having to go through training to be a teacher. Some of the best educators I've ever met in the technical education field are people with degrees in physics, chemistry, engineering, and math who have never once set foot in an education program at a major university. They have real-world experience that they can bring into the classroom, show the kids how to apply the basic skills in a problem-solving setting so that they can begin to develop critical thinking and problem-solving, which is something we sorely lack today. Teachers, unfortunately, in our public school system are forced to teach to a test. And they neglect, or they don't neglect, they're forced to work around some of the critical skills such as critical thinking and problem solving and focus on keeping the test scores where they need to be or advancing to where they need to be simply because that's what the bureaucrats demand. So that's what we need. I think we need to do in education, a few different things. Another thing that we have to do is we have to address the crime and the opioid addiction problem that causes the majority of the crime. Growing up here in Valley Station back in the 80s and early 90s, we had problems, but they weren't on the scale that they are today. I would venture to say everybody in this room and everybody that the people in this room know have been in some way touched by the opioid addiction problem or the crime it produces. Whether it be a family member who is suffering from addiction, whether it be a family member who may have overdosed and died, or you yourself have been robbed, or your car broken into, or some type of vandalism because of these problems. So how do we address that? The first thing we have to do is we have to give our police officers more latitude in the interdiction of bringing drugs and the distribution of these opioids in our communities. We also have to give the judiciary more latitude in penalizing them. How do we do that? We give them the opportunity to add additional charges such as wanton endangerment or attempted manslaughter if someone is convicted of trafficking and distributing heroin, especially large amounts of it. We have to go after the distributors right off the bat. That's the core of the problem, the people who are making money off the suffering of other people. We also have to go and extend a compassionate hand to those who are suffering from addiction now. It's easy to stand here and say, punish them, they're criminals, they're engaged in illegal activity. That's true. But once they're incarcerated, it cannot become a revolving door. We can't simply stick them in jail for 24, 36, 48 hours or a few weeks and expect them to come out rehabilitated. What we have to do is once they're in jail, we have to begin a program of helping them wean themselves off their addiction. And once out, or before they even go in, we also have to develop ways to allow them to have access to affordable, adequate addiction treatment programs. Whether this be in the local churches, I attend Valley View, and they've got an excellent program that meets on Thursday nights, celebrating recovery. So those are some of the programs we can invest in. They're very inexpensive. We can promote them, and we can help solidify a support group around people who are suffering with addiction. We've also got to address the needle exchange program. Let's not kid ourselves. It's not a needle exchange program. It's a free needle giveaway program. And these needles end up at our bus stops where our kids go to school, in the parks where they play, alongside the road where we walk our dogs and take our children for bike rides. So what we have to do is we have to come up with a means to track the needles, if not abolish the program outright, because it is a drain on the taxpayer wallet. We have to insist that this program become an actual needle exchange program instead of a needle giveaway. There's ways to do that through barcoding, through tracking, etc., etc. We've also got to go as far as to mandate that any of these needle exchange programs, anytime you're given needles, you're given access to a proper way to dispose of these needles, whether it be through the medical disposal boxes or some other means, so that they don't end up in Sun Valley Park or the Greenwood Boat Docks, things like that, or alongside the road. That is something we have to come to grips with as a community. It's not going to it takes more than just me standing up here saying, we have to address the drug addiction problem, thank you, good night, and walk away. We have to get out into our community, because that's the core of the problem, is our communities have been eroded. So we have to get back out into our communities, stand together as a group of concerned individuals, and we have to let the dealers know that we're not going to take it anymore. We're going to have to make their lives uncomfortable just as they've made our lives uncomfortable. We have to form block watches. We have to be active and engaged in those block watches. We have to walk the neighborhoods, let people know that, hey, your block watch is here. If you see something going on in your neighborhood, pick up the phone and call the police. It may be just one voice, but if you get 3 or 4 or 5 of your neighbors to call about it, somebody you suspect is dealing in illicit drugs, well, the cops are going to be forced to listen because there's not just one person calling. It's 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 people calling. That person will soon come to understand that what they're doing in that neighborhood is not welcome, not wanted, not condoned, and there will be repercussions, and that they will have to adjust the way they're going about their daily lives because they will face the legal penalty and the full force of the law. So I encourage people. That's one of the things I always do when I give a speech is I encourage people to get involved in their communities because it takes more than just sitting on Facebook griping about it. And I'm a big proponent of social media, but change is only you can only engage in change if you're out there forcing the change to happen. Change doesn't happen from a post on Facebook. Change doesn't happen from a post you read on a website or a news story. Change happens when we become involved in our neighborhoods and do something about the situation that we see at hand. So I would encourage you to take that message back, get involved, create networks within your communities in order to address those particular types of problems. And finally, before I open it up to some questions, one of the things people always ask me, well, other than those 3 points, what else is near and dear to your heart? What else do you want to see happen in the state of Kentucky? Well, right now, the federal government is constantly trying to encroach on our everyday lives, whether it be through attempts to limit our Second Amendment rights, whether it be attempts to undermine our religious freedoms, or whether it be through excessive taxation. One of the things that I want to do as a state representative is stand against the federal government's encroachment on our daily lives, as well as the states. Fortunately, our founders were very brilliant men, and they gave us a tool in the 10th Amendment to stand up against the federal government and to say, in some cases, this is unjust. We are going to take matters not necessarily into our own hands, but we are going to push back through legal means and through the utilization of this 10th Amendment. And I'm a firm believer in that. I think that if Washington continues to go unchecked, we are headed towards despotism and tyranny. Unfortunately, that is the life cycle of a democracy. And unless we as states and as individuals in those states stand up against these type of encroachments on our everyday freedoms, Washington will continue to push and will continue to erode on our freedoms because, well, if you've ever met a politician, you know they lust for power. Ain't that right, Harold?
Yes.
It's absolutely right. So I would encourage you to take everything I've said, digest it, take it home, tell your friends, say, man, I seen that guy Mike Payne the other night. He's an all right guy. He's a regular guy that came from the same background as me, and you should really check him out and hopefully vote for him. And that's what I'm going to ask you guys to do. Take the messages home, think about it. I'm not asking you to vote for me simply out of a partisan reason or an ideological reason, but because you actually think that it's time that we change the things that happen out here in Southwest Jefferson County and in the state as a whole. I lived out here again 44 years. I've seen a lot of the things that have happened. And people say, how can we fix this? Well, one of the first things we can do is change our representation, look for people like myself who are going to take the community's concerns, the community's desires, and what the community wants, and put that ahead of the special interest and the political parties. And you have my word as a man of honor and as a father and as a taxpayer that I will put the concerns of Southwest Jefferson County and the state of Kentucky ahead of all the special interests and people who actively seek to undermine our democracy. So with that, I'll open it up to a couple questions real quick. Harold, he's probably chomping at the bit to get up here. He loves to...
You already said everything.
Okay, well, any questions from anybody? Yeah.
Christian, I'll answer your question the night before bed.
Okay, I'm talking to you already about 20, 30 minutes. Be real on this.
Yes.
What are you seeing my attention the other day about DHS pushing the real ID on Kentucky? And evidently, our state's demand to have it pushed back got rejected.
Yes.
Where do you stand on it?
I am not in favor of real ID. Again, it goes back to what I was saying there at the end. It's an encroachment on states' rights. Now, people don't like to hear that word a lot, states' rights, because they think Johnny Reb marching through the swamps and down in Alabama fighting off Yankees. Okay? But we as states have rights. And we have jurisdiction. We have the ability, we should have the ability to opt out of a program such as a Real ID that basically is, in a lot of respects, used as a tracking device so that the federal government knows where we are, when we're there, and how long we've stayed, and when we're back home. So how can we combat that? Well, unfortunately, we appealed that to the powers that be. Our appeal was denied. I think there are other legal avenues that we can explore. But as it stands now, it's going to be real tough to do that because the legislators in Frankfurt, the ones that are there now, don't really see it as a problem. I see it as an issue, again, that encroaches on my freedom of movement, my freedom of self-determination. And I think that, we can explore creative ways to do it, maybe look at ways to get the ID where it's not as intrusive, that we can hopefully find a middle ground. But as of right now, I don't see a lot of opportunity because of the fact that the federal government has such a stranglehold on the states.
What kind of accountability is there for teachers currently? And how can we hold them more accountable? So if, say, after 3 years, if they're not graduating students and the students can't perform real world stuff that a graduate ought to be able to do, show them the door that somebody else can do.
Well, one of the things that we have to do is we have to develop a program where teachers are held. And I think that can be done really easily because right now, all of the records, you can go online if you've got a kid in school and you can just look at all their homework scores, all their test scores. Well, we need to incorporate that also into a means by which parents can see the overall performance of the teachers. And that's just a simple algorithm to where you can go through and look at the overall class average. And unfortunately, here in Jefferson County, we've got the teachers' unions to contend with. And they are not interested in holding teachers accountable because ultimately the teachers are the source of their power. Okay, and they love to throw around their political power. So, as a state, what we have to do is we have to introduce performance standards, not necessarily on the schools, but we also have to look at it on teachers. And I think that's one of the ways we do it is by incorporating the existing reporting system and use it to grade the teachers. But you've also got to get the parents involved in that because a lot of parents don't even go look at their kids' scores. Okay, so we've got to provide some transparency to the parents. We've got to somehow figure out a way to bring them in so that they know what is actually going on in the classroom as far as their teachers' performance. And I think that we have to introduce some type of standards that will govern, how teachers are graded. Now, I don't think that we should give teachers, 2 years to perform, and if you don't perform, you're out. If after 2 or 3 years you're consistently producing students with poor grades or with consistently producing poor academic standards, then you have to go back to some sort of remedial teacher's instruction in order to discover ways to maybe increase those scores or increase those standards. And once you do that once or twice, if you can't do that, well, unfortunately, we're going to have to find a way to work with the teachers' unions to enforce those standards, or they're going to have to be out of a job. Teachers work very, very hard. I'm not diminishing the work that they do, but you're right, there has to be some kind of accountability.
The chances are of implementing some kind of accountability like that versus the teachers' unions, say, locally, who don't want to be out of a job, and other places where they're doing fine, so they don't have to make changes.
Sure.
If they don't need them.
Well, I think that we can introduce some type of reporting system
so that parents and concerned individuals have the knowledge of how certain teachers are performing.
If not necessarily by name, at least by the class that they are teaching their kids in. And I think that we have to bring the principals and the administrators on board. That's a little easier to do than getting the teachers union on board. But once we can get the principals, the administrators, and some of the counselors involved, I think that we can potentially work towards some accountability. But it can't be just negative reinforcement. I think that we also have to look at incentives that we can give some teachers who perform really well. Because we've got some great teachers out there who unfortunately get lumped in with all the bad teachers. I mean, everybody can remember, or every parent knows the bad teachers that their kids have. Okay? I know some bad teachers that my kids have had. But they don't really remember the good teachers. So we've got to institute a system that's going to reward the good teachers, whether it be through social reinforcement, putting them on a pedestal, giving them positions of responsibility, perhaps tutoring or mentoring those teachers who have poor performance standards. And at the same time, we've got, or financially, possibly bonuses. But I don't know if we can afford that at a particular time. And then we've also have to engage in some type of additional training for teachers who perform below standard.
So I'm a U of L student. I'm a graduate student.
Okay.
Definitely over the age of 21.
Yep.
I do ride the city bus. I can carry a concealed weapon on a bus, but I can't carry it.
You're absolutely right. And that's a problem. I'm a big proponent of concealed carry in the classroom. I believe that we should introduce a program in the state of Kentucky that allows properly trained, properly vetted individuals who, especially if they've had military or law enforcement background, the ability to conceal carry in some of our schools. Now, I'm not asking every teacher to get out there and carry a weapon into school because, quite frankly, there's some people who probably don't need to be carrying a weapon. Okay? But there are some very qualified, some very psychologically stable people who I would want to put in that position so that if a shooter came into my classroom with my kid, they could at least slow them down and thwart some of their plans. So that's one thing I'm in favor of. But I'm also in favor of opening the universities. The university systems are these little kingdoms, these little fiefdoms of liberal indoctrination. Not to throw ideology into this, but the left is extremely scared of weapons because of what it represents in the overall quest for political control that they engage in. We all hopefully understand that. So they are going to continue to demonize weapons in the classroom. They're going to continue to demonize weapons on the university campuses because, well, they've got the ability and the freedom to do that. So as a state, we need to look at opening up concealed carry on our public universities. Our private schools, quite frankly, if a private school wants to ban that, that is their right. You just don't go to that school. But if my tax dollars are going towards a university system, I cannot sit by and idly allow them to squelch my constitutional freedoms. So I would be in full favor of concealed carry on college campuses because, quite honestly, those are some of our most vulnerable citizens because, they've got a lot on their mind. They're going to and from class. They're carrying a huge workload. They are ripe for the picking. And then you've got these large groups of people who are gathered together in these gun-free zones who, again, are ripe for the picking. Gun-free zones are, in a lot of cases, nothing more than invitations to disturbed individuals who may want to do other people harm. So I'm not in favor of gun-free zones at all, and especially on college campuses. The Second Amendment to me is sacred. It allows me to protect my family, it allows me to protect myself, my friends, and my property. Speaking for myself, it's an ideological perspective. I believe in the Constitution. And I'm not going to speak for some of the peers in the legislature, but I believe they would fear the political fallout that they would have to face amongst their voters. Jim Gray in Lexington, I'm sure I don't want to put words in his mouth, but I would suspect that he would favor that constitutional amendment just as Fisher would. I can't speak for, what's going on in Covington or Owensboro, but those are typically more conservative areas than you have. Typically, not typically, but in Kentucky, you had two bastions of leftist thought. One, unfortunately, is here in Jefferson County. The other one is in Fayette County in Lexington. But outside of that, I don't think that many legislators or mayors or any type of local officials would favor any type of curtailment on your Second Amendment rights. So as much as Fisher would love for it to happen, that doesn't have legs. Just because there's no way you're going to get the required votes in the legislature to get it on the ballot, and then once it gets on the ballot, it's going to crash and burn big time. If a company wanted to come into Louisville or Kentucky and they wanted to research a new method for, what's Coots Kleiner do? They're the hand surgeons. If they wanted to work on a special project like that and they receive federal funding, they would have to prove that it would have a direct economic impact on Kentucky, whether it be through job creation or eventual creation of jobs and revenue through a future business, before I would be willing to give them a grant. If somebody wants to come to Kentucky and discuss, research the mating habits of the yellow-bellied sapsucker, no, I think that's an absolute ridiculous waste of money. But if it can have an eventual impact on the well-being of Kentuckians economically, then I think that would be a good investment.
Cultivation. Traditionally, going back to the 1700s, Kentucky was one of the largest hemp-producing states in the country. I would have no problem with industrial hemp, just because it's been proven that you can't smoke it, you can't do whatever else you can do it with it. I think that it would be an economic resource that some of our farmers who have drifted away from tobacco and some of the other traditional Kentucky products, I would have no problem with industrial hemp. Well, small crowd, but I want to say thank you to everybody who came out. It's important that you came out, get engaged. You threw some questions, and quite honestly, most of the questions y'all answered, I've never had to answer before. Or you ask, I've never had to answer before. So it's always good to hear what some of the local citizens and residents have on their mind. So again, I thank you all very much for coming out.
And it's about time for change. And Mike would be part of that change. So if we can get the voters out, and we can flip that house, these things that you're talking about, there's a way to do these things. And Mayor Fisher, with that idea, he had 3 years now, he's been going to Frankfurt trying to put another tax on. He's telling us that we will get to vote on what he wants, what we want to do. How many projects do you think is going to happen in Southwest Jefferson County? Slim and none.